Hey everyone, welcome in. Betsperts Golf here for our first look, the 2026 FedEx St. Jude Championship, first leg of the playoffs, coming off of another youngin winning at Sedgefield, Michael Brennan. Kids are winning, Ron. How we doing today?
Yeah, doing well. Good to be here. What can you say? I'll admit it, I was 100% wrong about Michael Brennan. I write the Golf Digest article every week. He was one of my big faves of the week. I followed him in Detroit, so I'm well aware of how dominant he is off the tee. His approach game is very underrated. My thinking was, you know, Sedgefield is a completely different course, and he has had a little bit of trouble on positional type courses where you have to have a strong short game, which has been his biggest weakness. And then he just goes out and just he still lost strokes around the green, but his putting was really really good. And so all credit to him. And yeah, it's an exciting time. We've got a lot of youth here. I know that was his second win already, but yeah, it was a fun watch, and I love Sedgefield, and a lot of talk about. I think it is going to be a tier one event starting in 2028, and I'm like 100% behind that because when you look at the round to round play here, you'll see guys who are +8 and -8 in the same round, and it's the ability to see good shots being rewarded, bad shots are punished, and you wouldn't think of it as kind of an old school track, but it plays every year, and I think it's a great choice to make it a tier one event.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. I've talked about I love Sedgefields. There's just a lot of different tee boxes that you can stand on there, and like, where do I want to go? It's the way that they use the terrain. There's just a lot of like little things in terms of it being a fun positional track. I think you highlighted it great too, because there are 61s and 62s out there for someone who's painting fairways and throwing darts and running hot with the putter. But like, very easy to throw up a big number and kind of play yourself out, considering how the field can post the 61s and 62s. I think that's a shot quality test. It's good play is rewarded. If you're a little bit off, you're going to get punished. And I would love to see a great tier one field here every single year, because of its natural place in the schedule. You're just never going to see. We're not going to see Scotty and Rory here, right? If we probably wouldn't see Cam Young if he didn't have some local ties and hadn't won this event last year. So like, it is this natural spot in the schedule that we wouldn't see a great field. So I'm excited that could be the case. Yeah, I mean, the Brennan thing. That's a couple weeks in a row. We have it again this week here as we go to Southwind. The Brennan case, and it's actually the reason I probably missed pre-flop on Thor too, is like, if you look at the data, they really benefit from the par fives, right? They are, kind of middle of the pack, par four scores. You really benefit from the par fives, and you have these longer par fours and these par 70s. That's two birdie holes essentially go away for those guys. So really impressive for back-to-back Thor and Brennan to win on these par 70s that haven't really suited their game per se all year, where they've really made their hay on spots where they can pick on the par five. So impressive. I mean, really, if you look at the best par four scorers on tour, those are just your best golfers on tour typically, right? Like, if you're winning the par fours, you're doing something right. So it's just really impressive. We open up the can of President's Cup discussion every, this time of year always. And now I think really interesting discussions with these three in particular, all getting into the playoffs, all winning events, playing well at the right time. I know this is, we're still a month away from that, but it is an interesting discussion for getting these younger sub 25-year-old Americans that are winning golf tournaments is it's pretty cool to see. So we'll move now to TPC Southwind, Memphis, first leg of the playoffs. All 70 golfers are here. Rory's in the field, which is cool. It seemed like he was definitely not playing, and I was worried that would be a trend for some of these other guys, just because, with them changing kind of the way things start when you get to Atlanta, less incentive to jockey for position in the top 30 because you're not getting the, starting strokes. But cool that we got everyone here. Another par 70 Bermuda mostly track here down in the southeast. We have the Zoysia grass fairways, but tell everyone what they need to know about TPC Southwind.
Yeah, another par 70, right around 7,300 yards. This course hasn't changed a ton but there was a renovation a couple of years ago, actually before last year's tournament, where they kind of redid a lot of things, completely new greens. So we did see the course on approach get tougher. Greens and reg dropped from 62% to 58%. So, and we can kind of get into that when we get into the rabbit hole a little more. But yeah, it's a tree lined layout, narrow, kind of undulating zoysia fairways, 28 yards wide only. So very narrow fairways this week. 3-inch Bermuda rough, Bermuda greens. So yeah, definitely targeting players kind of similar to last week who grew up in the South, are familiar kind of with the chipping, putting on Bermuda. So, but yeah, over the last 5 years, this course has played to about an average of 1 stroke under par. I'm kind of putting it slightly on the easier side when looking at tour difficulty. And we had, of course, Justin Rose last year won at 16 under. But kind of water is one of the main defining features here. So it got a lot of comparisons to, PGA National. So lakes and streams, ponds directly in play on 11 different holes, more water balls here actually than any other tour venue. So, I know Twin Cities is up there, PGA National. This actually has the most overall. So yeah, it's a course where, like you said, only 2 par 5s, easy scoring opportunities are limited compared to, a lot of other tour courses. And again, like I said, the Bermuda rough is kind of the defining factor as well. You get a lot of flyer lies here. And kind of one of the biggest things for me is when I'm looking at approach play. And I will say it is a ball strikers course. So we get into around the green putting much easier than average. And you really want to focus here when looking at the data for me, especially looking at the rabbit hole is, off the tee approach. But one of the stats that, just like kind of, you don't have many courses like this where, the importance of finding fairways here. Players, you're hitting the green at a 73% rate when you're on the fairway. When you're in the rough, it's 33%. So you're literally dropping 40 percentage points if you miss fairway. So like last week, you heard the players talk about Sedgefield. If you're going to score, you got to find the fairway. Probably even more so here. So that's going to be, my main focus is, again, fairway finders, and then guys, these small greens, 4,500 square feet. So that's kind of the game plan this week.
And what's interesting is we have seen the trend too. I have the approach numbers here up on from our course stats page for TPC Southwind. We've seen the driver usage tick up too. In the last couple of years, after being say kind of flat for a little bit, and now we've really spiked to more driver heavy usage, which is interesting when those are pretty insane splits relative to what we typically see, greens and reg from the fairway, kind of in line with the PGA Tour average, but greens and reg from the rough, penal rough, penal missed fairway penalty. So that is significant. So you got to be dialed this week. It's just kind of like you said, ball strikers test. When you look at past leaderboards, past winners here, it's guys that have, Hideki, ball striker, Lucas Glover, right? We know where Lucas can bleed strokes. It's not usually ball striking. He's going to be in the fairway, and the approach game can be dialed in. The Zalatoris breakout finally against Sepp Straka, another great ball striker. That was Abe Answer's calling card. JT, Brooks, Dustin. It's a test where we've seen good winners, mostly guys coming in with really good ball striking form. We're going back the wrong way, but we're getting Justin Leonard and Jeff Maggard. But yeah, historic ball strikers. So love to see that. If you want to play around with all of this stuff and get in the rabbit hole, get access to all that we do, I want to remind you to take advantage of a deal with our partners over at Rebet. You can use our promo code BSG. You can actually go over to the site, betspertsgolf.com, check this out. It walks you through it. Really simple. You have to use the promo code BSG. You have to use the promo code BSG when you sign up. Otherwise, there's nothing we can do. Make sure that you please do so. You can click the link, download it, prompts you for the code. Again, it walks you all through it here. You can deposit $10 with them. They will first deposit match that 100%. So you can do that all the way up to $100. So put 10 in your account. You got 20 in there instantly. You're going to get Betsperts Golf for a year. So if you want to get through the 2027 playoffs. Jump in there now. You can ride with us for the entire year next year for no additional cost. You will be on the Rebet deal all year. Great deal. No small print. That's it right here. If you have any specific questions, let us know. But it's a great way to take advantage and get all these tools and all the things that we're looking at here. So, yeah, you have these smaller green complexes typically. You think that naturally we need to kind of lean on some of the around the green stuff a little bit more, and it just doesn't show itself out there, partially because it's just a little bit easier. So it is something that I'm going to continue to look at the ball strikers here this week. And guys playing from the fairway, and these smaller greens too can typically lend themselves into some, better, easier putting numbers because they're just, easier to not have those long laggy putts. But you can see you got to make way out of the par fives. The tough stretch to finish on 17 and 18, but 16 is kind of a gift. Same thing on the front. You kind of start with a nice stretch where there's some scoreable holes to stretch or to start. Then you get into kind of some of the, stuff back and forth in the middle of the test. I think it's also another interesting corollary course week here. You touched on whether it's positional tracks, places with water, some of these southeast courses. I think it's a interesting corollary course week too, which we typically like to get into a little bit. So let's take a look at the odds board. Obviously, loaded fields, odds board courtesy of SharpStack, our friends over at 4for4. Scotty is here. Played well here. Has not won, but played well, and that's kind of been 2026 Scotty. He's played well every week and is not winning, which is tricky. It feels inevitable for that to break at some point, but you're seeing Scotty around 5 or so. They're on Kalshi, I think more than fair price. Tough click though. Rory here at 12 or so. Xander now third on the odds board, which is Xander felt like he was drifting a little bit in these fields, but Xander back up to third on the odds board, around 19 or so. Tommy, nice history here. Again, nice history, hasn't won. Tommy right around 20. Stan Burns playing really good golf. 2022. Cam 22. Matty Fitz around 22. Colin same, although there is a 26 on DraftKings. Ludwig, last that's short of 30. And then you drop down into this pretty large tier that's kind of right around 30 to 40 with Hideki, Goddard, Siwoo, Cantley, Hovland, Wyndham Clark, Bobby Mack, Henley, Koiven, kind of right there, right around 40, depending on where you're shopping. So again, all 70. So super duper strong field, and you're going to see some big numbers on some guys that are, probably you've been betting on in the 30s and 40s that are going to be close to triple digits, if not. And that's kind of what we get here in the playoffs. So shop around here early on a Monday morning. All right, let's get into let's look at the cheat sheet here. If you want to see, this is another tool that we have here. If you just want to get a sense of rolling form for the players in the field, get a sense of how they've played as of late. Obviously, we have the Wyndham stuff in here as well. Then you want to get a sense of who's played well at TPC Southwind. Excuse me, get all that in here as well. Are you leaning on course history much here, or are you kind of looking at more Southeast, recent form, corollary courses?
Yeah, I mean, this is one, so this is a playoff event. They played here, a good deal going back. So even before it was a regular tour event. So it's kind of in the middle of the pack, but there is a lot of variance on this course with all the water. So not as much as I would be. I think recent form is a thing. I think someone like Hideki, who is just top of the leaderboard every week the past few weeks, playing a lot. Hideki, just looking back at the data, he's a guy who, the more he plays, like, he doesn't really get tired. So, and he's got the best course history here when you look at total strokes gained. So, yeah, that's something I'll look at. But like you said, Bermuda for sure. Sam Burns finally getting some respect in the odds, kind of right up there in the top tier. Sure. He's a guy who definitely fits here as well. So, yeah, that's kind of I'll look at it, but not too closely.
Yeah. I mean, look at Cam last year. You hadn't had any course history really to speak of here, and then Cam comes last year T5. That speaks to it more than anything. But yeah, Hideki's recent form, playing very well, and then is didn't come in 22, but has finished inside the top 20 in 5 straight appearances here. And I was on him here in 24 for the win, which was nice. So yeah, this is again, it's a ball striker's test, and that kind of pans itself out here if you look at the tournament cheat sheet here. So let's jump into the rabbit hole. What do we want to look at? What are some high level, anything in the high level stuff that we typically look at from a scoring conditions, course length, field strength, or where do you want to start this week?
Yeah, so like this is very similar to the signature events that we've had throughout the year, kind of a similar structure, 70-man field. So we have a lot of options, in that filter condition box, if you want to look at no-cut events. Something I like to look at too is I'll take out large fields, I'll look at intermediate and small fields. And that to me is just, who plays well. And if you want, obviously a lot of these are going to be no-cut events as well. So,
Yeah.
Different ways you can go about looking at how guys perform in these types of events. I'll definitely look at the strong, another way is to look at strong, very strong field strength. I mean, everyone is here. Daniel Berger, I don't know what's going on with him. Hopefully he's not injured again, but he's about the only guy who didn't come this week. So, that's, I think when you look at the scoring conditions, it's kind of in the middle. Course length, it's not, short to average par 70. So I'm not going to look at that this week as much as, who plays well in strong fields. And again, you have the signature event option as well. So I'll kind of mix and match that in. But again, these are the best players in the world this week. So I'm just kind of, for me, it's more focused on the data. And like we talked about, and you talk about all the time, par 4 scoring is going to be huge this week. Putting and chipping on Bermuda greens. And obviously ball striking is the big one.
Big time ball striking. You need a floor and a ceiling for sure in the ball striking, and we can look at that too. So no surprise, 2026 strong in very strong fields. Scotty kind of lapping the fields in terms of strokes gained total average. Rory, Cam Young, Colin Morikawa, Tom Kim. Kudos to Tom Kim. He's just playing really good golf. You kind of fell flat yesterday for, I know, a lot of people that were looking for him to chase and hunt down the top of that board, and kind of stalled. But for the most part, I mean, he's just playing good golf. It's cool to see after him being kind of in the wilderness a little bit there for a bit. I think he probably just playing a lot of golf with Scotty and probably trying to chase distance and speed. And, I think he got back to doing his thing. I think he's, hooked up with Sean Foley. He's playing really well. Fitz, Ludwig, Chloe only gets 4 rounds of strong field. Tommy Burns, as you highlighted, Burns deserves his spot on the odds board, playing great golf. My only concern is just had a baby, wasn't sure if he was even going to be in the Open, and then he goes home. He has this little lull of no events. How much has Sam been playing for the last 3-4 weeks? That makes me a little nervous. Sam Burns, a couple of guys that I liked, before I saw the odds board, and then saw the odds board, and and Burns is one of them. That was tough. But would understand why anyone would go to him, especially, we're on Bermuda. A lot of things checking the box there. Ricky playing good golf. Henley, Xander, Akshay, Wyndham, all these guys are all right around a stroke in these strong fields here. So good kind of foundational structure of the week in terms of when you're starting to model. I like that quite a bit. If you want to see who's separated ball striking wise, Alex Fitzpatrick, not making putts or chipping very well, but the ball striking stuff is great. There's Rory, Scotty, Ludwig. Again, this is where Tom Kim pops in. So just to get the ball striking stuff like we talked about. Kitayama jumps up there too, obviously. So that's good stuff. Let's jump off of this and let's take a look at some of the over-under. I'm using this more and more. And kudos to you. You pushed on this a little bit. I thought that the floor ceiling stuff was really fascinating and interesting. And I'm I don't know where I'd be modeling with it. Now it's really trying to pick winners. I think it's actually a really important piece to have in the model. So good on you for pushing that, because now it's a foundational staple in my model every week. I want to capture floor. I'm typically looking at 2+ strokes in strokes gained total and ball striking almost every week in my model now. It's just one of those things that stays in there. So we're still left the strong and very strong fields on. how frequently guys are gaining strokes. You could see consistency here for these players. And I like to see where guys can really start to separate, where you see Scotty and Tommy gaining 2 or more strokes in at least half their rounds. I think that's really telling. You like to see where guys can go out and start to separate. When you look at the ball striking, where guys are doing this, Rory, Scotty, Alex, Colin, kind of around 80%. You see, a guy like Jordan Smith consistently gaining ball striking. Is there a ceiling? Not as much, but he's not going to play himself out of it until he gets on the green. Then he'll find a way to play himself out of it. But, I think that's interesting to capture. Ball striking wise here, again, Koiven, Rory, Brennan, Fitz, Scotty, Alex, Fitz, Tom, like these guys are all 30% or more of their rounds gaining ball striking, again, against tough fields. So if you want to pull off the tough fields, you could do that. You see how frequently guys are gaining strokes ball striking. This is where Rory really separates. Again, smaller sample than most of his peers. Brennan, Scotty, Fitzpatrick brothers, Siwoo, Colin. I think these are really important pieces when you're trying to, I think, depends on what you're trying to do with the model. Andy and I have talked about this a lot on Tuesday. Like, I think the model that you're building is probably designed to be a little bit flatter than the model that I'm building, because I'm not building a model to give me 150 lineups for DFS or to highlight any names. I'm trying to build a model to pick a winner. You're also betting more matchups. You're betting more finishing positions than I am, whereas I'll sprinkle that, but mostly I'm betting outrights. So I'm really trying to find ceiling a little bit more. So think about when you're looking at models, when you're thinking about that, trying to build out, think about what your end goal is. And I think that matters a ton.
Yeah, and Alex Fitzpatrick being on here, I think, is a great example of this because, yes, we've seen him throughout this whole year. He's been in every signature event. He played his way into those, and he's competed and been on the top of the leaderboard almost every week, it seems. We see him last week. He kind of had some time off, a little rusty at Sedgefield last week. But again, this week, when you see him, on the top page here for ball striking, for off the tee, for approach, I think that's a great sign for him and just shows, again, the rabbit hole showing you that his upside is pretty high. And, you see Brennan up here. And so, yeah, completely agree with you. I think this is a great tool. And another one that, maybe not as much because it's not on a per round basis, but the finish position tool where you can go in, hey, I want to see top 10 rates on, whether it's strong field events, whether it's signature events. And so again, even though we do that all the time in the rabbit hole, as far as when we look at the strokes gain data, you can also take that same approach and, hey, let me try to create what players are going to face this week. Okay, it's a strong field, whatever filter you want to put on there, who has the highest top 10 rate. And so just another way to, and if you want to find a floor, obviously, this week, made cut percentage doesn't matter, but like for last week, hey, who has a high floor where I can, look at the made cut percentage as well. So if you're a person that, if you're just doing outrights and you just want ceiling, I would definitely also look here at, top 10 percentage, obviously for DraftKings, if you're playing DFS, average finish position, you get points for how you finish. And so there's so many different, tunnels you can go down looking at this data.
I think this is a great one to call out too. I think the best use for this too, and again, you can use, any of the views for this. I think, we talk about form, but I think if you want to like retroactively look at what's going on, I think looking at lead-in form to the previous year is really helpful. In this, through the finishing position lens, you can go into the calendar, you can go ahead and grab previous year. So if I want to go into like late July, if I want to just see, here's, July to August of last year, when we got to this event, like, again, you might not have a ton of data. I have 2026 on, that's probably why. You're not going to get a ton of starts. You can give, again, in this sample, you're not, but you can mess around with what you wanted to see. Who was playing well leading into last year's event? So like Justin Rose, 3 events, he was mixing a little bit. Oh, this is actually grabbing his win. So if you wanted to, make sure you pull that out, if you wanted to do that, you can go ahead and, kick this back a little bit. And you get a sense of like, hey, how frequently was that guy in the mix? Who was playing pretty well? So, again, you're going to mess around with sample size, but again, if you want to get a lead in form, you can mess around with the calendar. You can mess around with any sort of view, but I like looking at finishing position to say, hey, like what happened here last year, and was there any signal now that we look back on who played well? Like, you know, Tommy was playing well, which is not surprising. You know, Rosie was playing well, limited, but you know, had a top 10 in there. So again, million ways to use the rabbit hole. So this is another good use case for that too. You can use that same thing with like rolling averages. Yeah, I think it's another great use to see. You can kick it back even further, set it like the week before this tournament and see how that guy was playing 24 rounds, 20 rounds, 12 rounds heading into it. So those are really probably underutilized. If we were tracking like usage for specific metrics, I would assume, you know, rolling averages, finishing position, floor ceiling are probably a little bit underutilized.
Yeah, that's the crazy thing is I forget about the rolling averages. Like there's so much I'm looking at, and you know what you did looking at the lead in form. I never even thought to do it that way, but that's a great example of, yeah, if you're trying to go back and see how a guy was doing. But yeah, there's so many ways, and you know we're going to add hopefully a baseline view as well where you can see, you know, with all the filters we have, well, okay, if a guy's better on Bermuda, how much better is he on Bermuda compared to the field? And so there's a lot that we're going to keep adding to it. But yeah, there's so many methods. Even if you wanted to, you know, like we did last week a little bit on here, is you could do the same process just for first round leader, you know, who is coming in, who's playing well in first rounds. And yeah, there's so many ways.
Yep. Yeah. Have questions, again, jump in, make sure you're in the Discord. If you're a subscriber, ask questions, break it, like, you know, find things that you're not sure that you think it's signal or not, or, again, don't over filter, don't read Ron's preview, look at all of his suggested filters in key stats. Like we have this here, he puts it in the bottom of his article. Again, great article. You should be reading this to start every week. You see here important stats. Don't just go and click all these on and try to see what it spits out. Just do a couple of these at a time, one at a time. You know, think through it a little bit. Don't mindlessly click and you know, hope it's going to spit out the answers. You got to think through what you're actually trying to have the data do when you're asking it to do some of these things. Again, that's what the Discord's there for. That's why we're trying to do shows this way. Jump in the chat for on YouTube. Let us know if you're messing around with it and something that you're struggling with, or something you think that you found a signal. Let's share it and continue to make it better. Par 4 scoring, I think, is going to be clutch this week. It's a mix of like, you know, 400 to 450s, but there's a decent amount of 450 to 500. So for me, it's like I'm going to look at par 4, strokes gained par 4. I'm not going to get super granular on the dispersion of the whole length. But again, with just the 2 par 5s and knowing that those are birdie holes for pretty much the majority of the field, you really need to take advantage of the par 4s. And again, if you know, searching through this, it is very much a, you know, who are the best players, who's playing the best. When you look at who can separate on par 4s, Scotty, Rory, Sam Burns. I know Sam Burns has, again, really good par 4 numbers. Koivan, Cam Young, Foxy up here, which, you know, you love to see. Good for him. Gary Woodland. Interesting. Xander, Akshay, good par 4 scores, dipping a little bit. The recent form's been not as great. Henley, not surprising. So these guys kind of all clustered here in like the 0.7. So again, something that I think you need to look at. You can look at par 4s through the lens of strong fields, lots of different ways. But what else do you want to highlight before we wrap?
You know, I think a course like this where you're going to have to score birdies, I think looking at the scoring page, you know, scoring ops, just the general view, just guys who are, you know, I think, you know, guys who have played recently, you know, I think Hideki, JT, guys who played last week, some of the guys who played in Detroit. I might favor them like we're talking about. Some of these guys have had a few weeks off. And
right.
Again, how predictive is that? You know, Justin Rose, I think he had a couple weeks off last year as well before he came in here and won. But, you know, I want to try to capture guys who are hitting it well right now in recent form. So I'll look at the scoring ops, you know, inside 5, 10, 15. I'll put it on like last 3 months. I think that's a pretty decent sample of, and again, you know, sometimes I'll look even deeper. I'll look, you know, last 16 rounds, another way to do it.
Yeah.
But just to see, you know, you'd be surprised some of the guys who are not as high as you would think. A guy like Alex Noren, who I can't remember what he was at when I looked, but he putted so well, and that kind of masks, his approach play sometimes is not as good as it was. But I think this is another good look.
Yeah, I'm on the last 24 rounds. You see Noren's third worst percentage inside 10. Xander last 24 rounds. So it's just surprising. There was a little lull there on approach for Xander. Seemed to figure it out a little bit in Detroit and get himself in the mix a little bit. So it's definitely capturing some of his, not quite as good stuff. And again, you can mess around with the rounds. Like Ron said, you can go into the time frame. In this situation, like 3 months, I'd rather level set on rounds because it's going to pull out some of the noise of, whether it's a Rosie or Rory, guys that aren't playing as frequently as some of these other guys, and just kind of, level set what they've done recently. So,
yeah, you see some really good players in those first 5 there who are really struggling.
Yeah, Sep is really, it's been a really down year for Sep. You think about how consistent he's really been for the last couple of years. It's been pretty rough. But yeah, a lot of red for some pretty good players in here. So you can see Rory here, last 24 rounds. Not inside 15 quite often either. But again, playing just big boy events only, majors only. Like this Rory sample is probably really, he doesn't have a Detroit in there or a 3M or compared to some of the other guys that have mixed a little bit. So yeah, definitely a good sense of who's giving themselves looks and then who can convert. So yeah, million ways to do this week. Let's look at the comp courses real quick. We'll back out here to see. Look here, let's say the last 2 years. We'll throw in Southwind as well, which I like to do, and just get a sense of who's played well on the comp courses the last 2 years here. I'll go all rounds, make sure we capture all that. Who's been the best? I'm on still in the scoring metrics. Let's just go strokes gained on all of your par 70 positional southeast sort of comp courses here. Scotty, Koiven with just 8 rounds. Tommy, Henley, Spawn, Matty Fitz, all decent sample, gaining at least a stroke and a half on the field. Yellow Miraju, small sample, but jumps up here. JT, Hovland, Cantley, BG, Connors, Bobby Mack, Morikawa, and Thor all gaining more than a stroke. Hideki right on the other side of it there with a really nice sample, gaining throughout the bag too. So again, I think a good week to look at comp courses. You can decide what the time frame is that you want to look at. You want to pull out a noisy sample like 8 rounds of Koiven. You can add it to the minimum round feature here, however you want to go about it. But I think this is also an interesting thing. And again, probably some confirmation bias to some names that we like, some names that we've already seen through some other data chopping that we've done here today. So good rabbit hole week. We got enough of Southwind to do it. So anything else for listeners before we wrap?
No, we covered it. I think also, obviously look at Bermuda splits, putting, chipping. But yeah, it's a week where hopefully they change the Tour Championship. I would love to see match play in the future. I know I was talking with Frank Nobilo at the Detroit Rocket Classic. Apparently CBS doesn't want match play because it's just not good for TV because, you have the threat of it ending early, and then, you have this broadcast window. You have to keep your hours. So I'm not too optimistic that's going to happen, but I would love for them to find a way to figure that out.
I would love to see. It's going to look different. What it looks like is we'll see. But yeah, I also agree. Like, the one thing that I think is right is the BMW. Like, it's just rotating on tracks that we don't get to see all the time. I like that. But I think the two, no offense to people of Memphis and Atlanta, but like this is tough to be there in August. Those are tough. It's warm. Let's mix it up a little bit. Like there's a lot of great golf in the Pacific Northwest and the Midwest that we don't get to go to early in the season. For different reasons. So like, let's mix some of that in. I know the logistics of hosting an event are massive. So like, there are some places that just are not built to, to have the footprint to hold it. But like, it's a little bit easier when you get to like 30 guys.
30? I mean,
50
can you
guys.
imagine the Tour Championship at Bandon Dunes? I mean, that would be amazing.
Awesome. Chicago Golf Club.
Yeah.
You know, like, come on. Like, we don't get. It's like there's so much. Let's go to some different. Let's go to some different places.
Yep.
So I think they will, and they'll figure it out. But man, it'll be interesting to see what happens. But you know, again, Southwind, if you're a Memphis person, hope they give it to you. Maybe just on the second tour, Challenger Tour, or whatever. All right, make sure you hit the like and subscribe before you take off. Betsperts Golf here on YouTube, Betsperts Golf, wherever you listen to the podcast. Jump over to the site and find that Rebet deal, that free subscription deal. There's more information in the show notes. Take advantage of that deal, guys. It's great. I mean, $10 for the whole year. It's typically $250 to get access to the entire year. All of Ron's picks, his matchup stuff. Get access to the site if you want to play around with all the data stuff. Deals doesn't get much better than that. So before you take off, again, hit the thumbs up and come back tomorrow. We'll share our betting picks with myself and